Now we'll take a quick 10 minutes to actually speak about what are some of the actions that we're looking at. We've spoken quite a lot about some of the issues that are coming up. We've spoken a lot about what responsibility means. Now let's hear what action, responsible action, might look like. These are starting points. I would like to invite Anna, who's my colleague, to the stage, who's going to speak a little bit about them, and we'll share what we've got in store for you over lunch alongside food as well. Anna Biswas is the Managing Director for Forum for the Future India. She has extensive international experience in the management and creation of change, applying innovation, foresight, and systems change techniques, and using them to build capacity in others to turn that insight into transformation strategy and action. Anna, I welcome you.
Thank you. I'm aware I am the one thing between you and lunch, so I will be quick, I promise. I do have just one housekeeping thing. If anybody, this is gonna start a stampede. If anybody happens to have left some cash at the registration desk, could they please come to me to reclaim it? I'm not going to give it to just anyone, I promise. I have criteria. All right, great. So, as Saksham said, and as Bharat quite eloquently put earlier on, after a period of understanding really what's going to help unlock and really enable responsible practices throughout the renewables value chain, the 25 participating organizations and the 9 partners in the Responsible Energy Initiative have come up with a number of different action areas that we think will tackle those barriers and significantly progress change towards that switch between renewable energy to responsible energy. We're in a phase of action, and we're going to be experimenting, we're going to be learning together, and we're going to be demonstrating what pioneering responsible practice really means. We're under no illusions that this is going to be hard. We know this. We know there are multiple barriers. We've heard about some of them already, and we'll hear about more of them this afternoon. But that's what we're aiming to tackle collaboratively. We've already heard that this can't be tackled by one organization alone, one entity, or even one country. We're all going to need to collaborate to do this together. We're going to invite you to join us. I'm going to tell you about some of these initial action areas. And then over lunch, you'll see some signs on top of the tables that are out there. That's where the teams that are going to be working on some of these action areas are going to be stood. So if you've got questions, if you're interested in that area, just come speak to people. Don't be shy. If you've got solutions, we'd love to hear from you. So we're purposefully, I guess one thing I should say before I tell you about this long list of action areas is we're purposefully doing this as a suite of actions because they reinforce each other. These are not siloed projects. They need to enable each other to go further and to reach further. As we heard this morning, this is a long game, but we do not have the luxury of time. So we need to do something to step on the gas, no pun intended. So the first action area that I'll be talking about and that you'll get to talk about is actually something that was mentioned in the kind of final points here. How do you get more uses out of that land? So multiple use of land, and this is going to be about co-developing and piloting an ownership, a benefit sharing, and a financing model that ensures land can be used in multiple ways at once. We know agrivoltaics is popping up as a solution, but we also know that we need to learn more in order to scale it viably and in ways that really do mean that the renewable energy development can contribute to building adaptive capacity in communities, but also energy, water, and food security all at once. So the Terry team are leading on this particular action area and would love to speak to anyone interested in implementing agrivoltaics and other solutions on multiple uses of land. The next action area is a playbook for investing in responsible energy. It's developing and testing a playbook in a way that's very, very participatory with financing organizations, be they equity investors, banks, debt providers. we're interested in all sorts of different financial flows and how they enable responsible energy. So how might we create a playbook that enables all kinds of finance flows to embed the renewable energy, the responsible energy principles in investments? The forum team, that's me, Saksham, Hansika, Manali, would love to speak to anyone interested in enabling those financial flows, so come speak to us. The third area is particularly exciting, and we'll hear more about this actually after lunch, so do come back if you're interested in this area. The team is essentially aiming to establish a circularity innovation challenge. So the aim is behind this to accelerate the development of more circular solutions throughout the value chain. So rather than worrying about this mountain of waste at the end and how to deal with it, how do we actually tackle this right from the start? The WRI team are leading on this, and they'd love to identify and pilot promising innovations in this area, with manufacturers, developers, all actors in the value chain. So please do come and speak to the WRI team over lunch about that. I think you're probably beginning to see how all of these interact. But the fourth one is a guide to responsible energy development for developers as their specific audience. It builds on extensive field work conducted by CEW together with the Vasudha Foundation in Rajasthan. So we're not starting from zero on this one. The study captures the perceptions of communities residing near large-scale RE projects and shares insights on land procurement and compensation, the significance of land, including so-called barren or wasteland, from cultural and religious and livelihoods aspects, competitive use of resources, and local economic development and livelihood creation. So it's really multifaceted. It will develop a conflict identification and mitigation framework, and that will be discussed in the study briefly. So the CEW team would love to speak to anyone interested in that over lunch and beyond. The fifth area of action is responsible RE procurement. That's about working collaboratively with large buyers of renewable energy, largely through the RE100 program. I'm sure you're all aware of that program. It's about engaging those buyers with the developers to understand where rapid advances can be made on transparency and where long-term investment is actually needed, and to develop and test a set of enhanced transparency criteria to build on today's standards. The climate group team are leading on this and would love to speak to anyone over lunch about it. 6, the comprehensive suite. This action area aims to embed public dispute resolution methodologies in energy transition policy and planning in India. So, small task. It's about making sure that that happens in a way that not only prevents conflict, but champions participatory approaches to decision making. It's also in the process of understanding the current landscape beyond the headlines, and the Consensus Building Institute team would love to speak to you over lunch because they're here specifically to understand more about what's going on. So please do come speak to them. Number 7, human rights in the value chain. Big crunchy issue, and I think that's probably been alluded to when lots of people are saying, yeah, we all need to work together on the value chain. It's too big for one organization to tackle alone, so how do we as a platform enable that kind of collaboration? It's an emerging action area, and essentially we're looking to support renewable energy actors to increase the sophistication of their human rights due diligence and their risk management, as well as to collaborate to tackle on what, quite frankly, does feel like quite an insurmountable challenge when it comes to solar in particular. The Business and Human Rights Resource Centre is actually leading on this at the moment in its development, but they're not, there's actually one person here, so we can't load her with loads of questions. So if you'd like to come and speak to me about if you're interested in this area, please do. And then finally, I'm really hoping that you guys have all been awake for the last few hours, and you'll have heard about the Site Right tool. It's ready, it's right here to be used. So please come and speak to the Nature Conservancy team about how you can come play with it and not break it, as Joe mentioned earlier on. So please do go talk to all the teams over lunch. They'll be at those tables outside, you'll see the signs. And please just don't be shy. We'd love your advice, we'd love your participation. Come join the party. The Responsible Renewable Initiative is definitely getting bigger. And we'd love to involve you all. Now, please do go enjoy your lunch. It's just through those doors to the right outside. You'll see some food waiting for you. Please do meet the teams, meet like-minded people, and be back around 2:25 for a really interesting panel on circularity in renewable energy. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a great morning.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll start off with the next panel discussion, which is on exploring how might we embed circularity in the renewable energy sector. A lot of you have expressed a lot of interest in circularity. So this discussion would be quite useful to listen into on what are the different opportunities of embedding circularity, what it means to be responsible as we're growing the RE sector in India. So can I invite the panelist and the moderator here, Namrata, who is going to moderate from WRI, Sujoy, Mr. Rao, Nalin, please come on the stage. We've also got Kay Wang, who works with the WRI space program, who's based in Netherlands. She's joining us online. Kay, we can see a very larger-than-life face of you here as well. But hopefully, the technology will hold up. Great. Thank you, everyone. This is the final panel discussion for the day. Afterwards, once we end, we'll have tea for all of you again, and more opportunity to network with each other as well. Namrata has been a colleague with WRI for us, and she also is a senior program manager there. And she leads a lot of different kinds of work on energy governance, and on circularity as well. So, Namrata, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Saksham. So it's because it's post-lunch, I'd like everybody to do one exercise before we start the panel. How many of you have a solar panel, any form of solar panel on their house? Do you have? Raise your hands or stand up. Okay, very few. How many of you have been involved in any sort of planning, financing, or implementation around solar? Okay. And how many of you know where your solar panels are going after the end of life? All right. So that's what the discussion is going on, not just about solar, but that's what we are thinking of discussing here today. But I'd like my panelists to introduce themselves rather than I introducing you. I do have your profile, but it would be interesting to hear from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nalin Agarwal. I'm the founding partner at the Climate Seeds Fund and co-founder at the Climate Collective. We were earlier in the solar and wind space as project developers till 2015, and from 2016 we've been growing the climate tech startup ecosystem. We've now developed what has become the largest early stage climate tech acceleration platform in South Asia, soon expanding to the rest of the global South. So I guess my insights, as it were, won't be as deep as some of the other industry experts. Main insights are going to be around the innovation and the startup space, especially in the solar and lithium recycling space.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alan Rao, I'm the CEO of a company called Exigo Recycling. And we are in the business of recycling electronic waste, lithium-ion batteries, PCBs, solar panels, plastics, and precious metal recoveries and waste to energy. We're opening up one of Asia's largest and India's first and largest lithium-ion battery recycling plant next month. We're inaugurating it. It's a 10,000 tons plant. India will be proud of, all of you will be proud of that too. And opening up multiple plants across the country and globally. Around 10 countries, we should be opening up the spokes for battery recycling. And in India, committed to an investment of around $25 million in opening up 10 recycling plants on e-waste. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sujoy Ghosh. I lead First Solar's business in India. First Solar is one of the world's largest manufacturer of photovoltaics, and we are in the process of building a vertically integrated semiconductor to module factory in India in Sri Perumbudur, which will be up and running by the end of this year, along with perhaps one of India's first or maybe the second after Dr. Rao's high-value recycling unit. And it's great to be here. It's time we started a conversation on responsible renewables. Our company believes in responsible solar, and from our perspective, responsibility is a lot more than just circularity. It has to be also discussions around the whole gamut of how to use labor in the supply chain, water usage, what kind of materials you use, etc., etc. So, as we go along in this discussion, hopefully we'll touch upon some of those topics.
So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Is that me? My turn?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me join you, even virtually. I hope you all enjoyed a pleasant lunch. I'm Ke. I'm the program director of PACE. That's a platform for accelerating the circular economy based in the Netherlands. So it's great to hear that there's a lot of interest from audience in circular economy. I have been working on circular economy for about 7 years now. And my very first project was circular business models in solar PV. So it's a topic very close to my heart. But honestly, it's a topic that hasn't gained too much attention in the circular economy community in the past. But the world is waking up to it, right? So we see an increasing number of discussions around it. Minerals, renewable energy has made to the main program of the World Circular Economy Forum this year in Finland. But it is still in a very early stage. So it's great to see Responsible Energy Initiative leading the discussion in India. Looking forward.
Thanks, Ka. Because you just started speaking, I'll start with you first. You just mentioned, we are just waking up to the challenge. I wanted to ask you, what are your concerns currently, the way things are going in the circularity challenge of renewables? And also, the importance, why it is so important. We know, in general that it is important to recycle, but especially for this sector, what is the important aspect here? And also, at the end, what needs to be done, what the gap is and what you see as the future.
That's a lot of questions. I hope I will not take too much time. So I'll try to get started, but I would like to hear from other panelists as well. My biggest concern is that we will not learn from the past. We've seen a similar pattern repeating again and again in many other value chains, right? Plastics, electronics, I'm sure Mr. Rao is very familiar with that. Textiles, we all scale first, the products are super successful, and then it comes a waste tsunami. And then we're like, oh, what do we do? What plastic ocean, we have the e-waste dump in developing countries, then we have to clean up the mess. So my biggest concern is that we don't learn from the past, and we might risk repeating that for renewable energy, which was created really for environmental reasons in the first place. But the other side of the concern is opportunity, right? Because for other value chains, if we sometimes wish there's a time machine that we can go back to fix the situation, to prevent the disaster from taking place. And well, with renewable energy, we are at that magical point. We are still at the beginning of the transition, at the beginning of the scaling. So we can do something together to prevent, instead of firefighting, the damage retrospectively. So, and another, more concretely, a biggest concern is that we miss the opportunity to embed circular economy from the very beginning. because we often talk about waste management. But from other value chains, we've learned that circularity needs to start from the very beginning, start from product design. Because if we consider reuse, recycle in the design requirement, that will make recycling, reuse a lot easier later on. And because solar panels, wind turbines, batteries tend to have very long life cycle, so if we miss that opportunity, then we'll be locked in by a linear design decades from now. So, yeah, I can keep talking on why circularity is important, but I think maybe I'll stop here and hear from the other panelists first.
All right, thanks. She mentioned, the manufacturing, and so I would like to come to you, sir, as Chair Ghosh. On when you are into this manufacturing business, and while you develop these mega projects, where do you start? What is your approach, and how are you embedding circularity in your approach?
Yeah, so First Solar's DNA has been around circularity for the simple reason, ever since the company started. We've built solar modules using alternate materials, which are completely independent of the Silicon Valley chain. And because we've used alternate materials, we use cadmium compounds, compound of cadmium and tellurium, which are actually the byproducts of the zinc and copper smelting process. So we take something which is waste in a particular industry, convert it into a product which displaces CO2, and at the end of the usable life of the product, we also do a high-value recycling and recover up to 95% of the semiconductor and reuse. And we can reuse it about 148 times before it is completely gone. So because we were using alternate materials, we started with the concept of circularity. And our panels, when we designed the product, we use glass. That's our biggest raw material, which is recyclable. So we don't use, very popularly used in the alternate solar industry is the backsheet, which is basically EVA. And we don't use EVA, we use glass as the backsheet because we want to recycle to the maximum possible. So there are, it starts from how you develop the product. You think about circularity from day one, and then you weave it into your technology and into your manufacturing process, coupled with high-value end-of-life recycling at the end of, in the manufacturing itself.
So if for your product, once it's out, how does it, one is the waste recycling when there is waste at your site. The other is the end producer responsibility. How does that work for you?
So, while we are talking about recycling end-of-life solar, you asked a question, what happens to the panel at its end of life? I think the question is, when does the panel end its life? Most panels are warranted for 25 years of usable life, but at the end of 25 years, if the panel lasts that long and doesn't break, there is still about 80% of the capacity left in the panel. So typically, solar panels, even beyond 25 years, will have a residual life and will continue to produce energy at a zero depreciated cost. So most of the recycling, if you look at the the waste percentage, there are three buckets in which the solar waste is generated today. Part of it, the bulk of it, is actually manufacturing scrap. So as you have these large manufacturing facilities, and India is now with the PLI, you're seeing very large multi-gigawatt sites which are going to come up. They're going to generate a lot of waste during the process because there'll be breakages. So you recycle those modules, right, as you would recycle manufacturing scrap. And if you have recyclable materials in that, then you will essentially reuse, right? The second the second bucket is really when panels get installed in the field. So there is breakages during transportation. Truck can turn turtle. I mean, solar farms are usually built in pretty remote areas. The infrastructure is not good. Or they can break during the installation process. Now, each panel weighs about 35 to 40 kilos. And so people do drop, when they put the panel on the structure, there could be a sharp object which hits the corner, the glass cracks. So that's the second stream of where the solar waste gets generated. The last is really end of life. So today, if you look at it, the end of life problem is very small. But does that mean we should not talk about circularity? We should, because the thing which I think the Indian government has done, to its due credit, is prohibited landfilling of solar. That is very important, right? At least mandate recycling at the end of life. Then we see the the industry take shape.
Right. Okay. So, Mr. Rao, I'll come to you now for the recycling bit. Since can you talk about the whole waste estimation numbers around solar, especially currently? How much are we seeing at level? What he said at manufacturing level. If you have any, not necessary, but what you're seeing in terms of the bulk volume and how it will increase in future as end of life for solar will have a big pile up there. And what is the tech that needs our attention right now in terms of recycling?
Yep, see, the recyclers' responsibility and expectation is the producers would be producing products using different types of chemicals and compounds and metals and whatnot. And it's the recycler's responsibility to find out what is there, the composition in it, and try to find out technical solutions in an environment-friendly way, and recycle and recover as much as possible. Now, that's an Herculean task. And so hence, like Sujoy said, right from the design, it starts there. Currently at 80 gigawatt hour, currently the solar industry is in, the expectations is around 500 gigawatt hour going forward. Most of these panels are out there, rightly said, manufacturing waste. It's not there yet in the country to a large extent, but all the installations that are there from where the waste comes in. So from the experience which we have seen, since the rules were not there till now, no user of the panels really took interest in sending it for recycling. And B, because being in remote locations, the logistics cost average pan-India itself spans between 12, 15, 18 rupees a kg, for that matter. And 3, most of the times when we go and see those panels out there, the aluminum frame is actually taken out by the nearby scavengers, I would say. So what's left out that's coming in. So recovery percentages wise, there's not much that's coming in, even though we are able to extract aluminum, remove the glass, get into further processing, and then get into the other processing of other metals out there, and including silicon, which we are able to extract. Right. So the volumes are not there currently, if I were to say, but I believe the expectations that the industry had, that the panels would be of 15, 20, 25 years, based on the discussions we've been having with multiple parties out there, it's not so. And like Sujoy said, there are many reasons why panels comes in for recycling, but the life of the panels, or maybe a few of them which I've heard, is refurbished panels out there in various parts too. So these panels are now coming in. Because the rules and regulations have been announced now, there's pressure on all these people to register themselves and come into the compliances in a very big way. So now I believe going forward, we will be able to see a large volumes coming out. But it will take at least 2-3 years for volumes to flow in. But technology-wise, there are technologies available, indigenous technologies available. Government labs like CMETs and other labs, they have come out with technologies. It's there available on license for anybody who would like to start this particular recycling business. So it's already there. It's not that it needs to be imported from other country and you need to start this business here. Yeah.
So could you also comment on the new regulation that is out and how that will benefit the recyclers industry right now?
Yeah. So around 3 years back, from the Prime Minister's office, there was a direction given to Niti Aayog. They've identified 11 verticals, e-waste and plastic and batteries and solar and tires and so on and so forth. So circularity was the subject, and 11 committees were formed. I was one of the committee members also in multiple streams there. and to help design a concept for the country, develop the rules which will benefit the Atmanirbhar Bharat, I would say. So to do that, you need commodities. Commodities are being imported into the country. Commodities are being consumed in the country. Manufacturing push is being given in a very big way. You need these commodities for manufacturing. Where do we get it from? Hence, it started 3 years back from Niti Aayog, and then the rules were announced last year. Multiple rules were announced, and e-waste rules were announced where solar also was included in it. Now, what it's done is it's looked into only 4 stakeholders. 1 is a producer, 2 is a manufacturer, 3 is a refurbisher, and 4 is a recycler. There are only 4 stakeholders in these rules now. So the one who produces and manufactures, and the one who is able to extend the life of the product, and one who is able to recycle the product. What the government has done is that they've fixed end of life for each item code. Earlier it was only 21 item codes. Television is an item code. Refrigerator is an item code. So 21 item codes increased to 106 item codes now. So targets has been given to the producers, fixing the life of a product, and there's a formula of calculating the targets year on year for each item code that's come in. B, there is environment compensation that's been announced, saying that if the recycler or the producer doesn't follow the compliances, there will be an environment compensation. 3, polluter pays principle. The EPR, the Extended Producer Responsibility rules, these are the rules there, and they've announced these targets according to that rules. 4, with the recyclers, they have given targets for recoveries of commodities now. And 5, they have put in an online portal where all the stakeholders will be interacting on the online portal now. So what they're saying is, till now the government has been working on retrospective information, but for solar industry and other product categories, they're asking the producers to upload the invoice details so that proactively in the next few years' time, the commodity that's available in the country in each of the vertical would be identified, and basis which the targets to the recyclers would be given, basis which the commodities would be recycled and extracted, recovered, and given back to the manufacturers. So this is the rule that's been set in. It's there for plastic, for batteries, for e-waste. And one last important thing, they've also made it mandatory for the producers from 5% to 30%, the secondary raw materials that the recycler recovers, these SRMs needs to be used in production of new products, manufacturing of new products. Now this is what, so as a whole, the whole world, we believe, and we heard that multiple times and are hearing it, and they are in awe of the rules that India has come out with. And we are proud to say that our rules are much more proactive now and forward-looking, and I'm sure there will be a big, huge change coming in for all the stakeholders, I would say. Yeah.
I'd like Mr. Ghosh to come in here. From your point of view, this particular regulation, how do you see it playing out with you, your organization, and what are the challenges you think other manufacturers will face?
Yeah, so from our perspective, whether the regulation existed or not, we were anyway going to invest in recycling. But that's what we do. That's the way of, way of our life. I think the regulation which has come out, if you take a step back, the solar industry is mostly utility scale, large solar farms. And so the way solar capacity is being built is in a very highly regulated manner, because finally the tariff is regulated. So everything downstream, finally the truth is what is the PPA tariff you get. And that drives everything else, right? This regulation which has come does put a responsibility on the producer, which could be an importer or it could be the manufacturer, whoever is placing the modules in the market, right? But what it does not clarify is who pays for it. The polluter pays is fine. If it is a regulation, there has to be a regulated fee. the India e-waste is modeled on the European WEEE regulation, which is actually a pretty successful model in the EU. And there are aspects of that which we need to work upon as collectively with the government to make this, the regulation is more of a statement because there is no targets for solar for the next 10 years. So yes, there is a regulation in place. There is a producer obligation in place effective 1st April, but nobody knows what's going to be the target. How is the cost going to be factored in the tariff of solar energy? And the cost has two parts to it. One is the cost of recycling, and then there's the cost of logistics. And the logistics cost is perhaps a bit more than the actual cost of recycling the module, just so that you understand, right? And I think these are issues. And the other issue which is very interesting is, you said what's going to happen, what will the impact be on the manufacturers? The challenge with the solar industry is that the life of a manufacturer, barring a few like us, has been 5 to 7 years, whereas the product has a 25-year usable life. So the question is, if you're going to have an obligation at the end of life, how will that obligation be enforced if the producer doesn't exist? And therefore, the European Union in the WEEE created a structure where they created something called a PRO, a Producer Recycling Organization. Producer Responsibility Organization, which is actually a not-for-profit. And what they do is they decide the fee for every given year. They collect that from the manufacturer on the day the product is sold. And then for that given year, that fee is distributed to the products which are recycled at the end of the life, minus the cost of logistics, which is to be borne by the owner of the module. Okay? And then they also set up network of collection centers all across Europe. So it's not like it was shipped 500 kilometers away. There are certain more detailed procedures in the WEEE. So as we think about India's regulations, yes, we've created a great regulation. It's a good visionary statement. But the devil's always in the details, especially when you're dealing with public procurement. And today there is no clarity on how all of this is going to be factored in terms of the cost. What is the impact on the price of the energy which is being generated? Because our customers are mostly the utilities, the DISCOMs. And they don't want to pay anything extra. They actually don't want to pay for the power itself, right? Sorry if there are DISCOMs in the room, but we all know the fact. So I think that's where the challenge will be for this rule to be implemented. It's for the government and the industry stakeholders to work together and convince the consumer, which is mostly electricity companies, that yes, there is going to be a price somewhere in the value chain which has to be factored in for the circularity. Nothing is free. And that's the most important element, I think, which we have to deliberate.
Nalin, I'll come to you on this because you're talking about the uncertainty of that regulation. And when there is no clarity on who is responsible for what and who is responsible for paying what fee, where does the finance aspect sort of come in here? What are the challenges you face when you have to fund a particular startup or particular circularity challenge that may come?
Right. Yeah, so this is obviously a tricky one because a lot of these startups in circular economy and climate tech, they have their own challenges. There's multiple valleys of death. They have long gestation periods. They're sometimes capex heavy, not always, but in this case, yes. But all that can be managed. Long time horizons can be managed. Other complexity in terms of technology complexity can be managed. But uncertainty is a hard one, right? But to some extent, that's what risk capital is there for, to kind of make decisions in this kind of uncertainty. The good thing is the trends are right. There will eventually be a deluge of lithium-ion batteries very quickly, in fact, in 3-4 years. Perhaps solar will take a little bit longer, but these are industries that we need to support with at least a few years of lead time, because you can't be reactive in this case. You have to be proactive when waste streams start when they suddenly become large. So it is the job of risk capital to look at how linkages are between if a startup and a founder is taking a risk, in this case, whether they can establish the right linkages with the supply chain, upstream supply chain, with the OEMs, etc. in certain cases, you have a closed loop system, like perhaps in First Solar, but in many other cases, there's an ecosystem emerging. So when we started out, I'll just take a step back in terms of the portfolios and pipelines we were seeing largely around energy. Slowly that started including more plastic waste startups, more and more increasingly in the carbon tech space as well. And a little bit now, we are seeing the equipment recycling companies come into the fore. We have, of course, Exigo and 3-4 others. We supported one ourselves called ZipTrax. It's a smaller startup, but we are seeing this. We are seeing founders who are seeing the opportunity. Eventually, the business case should be stronger and clearer. But yeah.
So, on a follow-up on this is, what are the current challenges in the knowledge gap? Which area when you're talking to manufacturers or recyclers, where is that knowledge gap that exists, which you need to be filled to make those decisions?
Right. I think there could be many answers to this. The way we try and look at this is how we can get industry and startups to engage better. So industry decarbonization is a major topic for most industries. That we did some research. There's about 139 Indian corporates, listed, unlisted both, that have made some public commitment to decarbonization, whether it's science-based targets, CDP, EV, RE100, whatever it is, right? So that's a significantly large number, right? Whether they're decarbonizing operations, whether they are decarbonizing their products, whatever it is, there's a strong impetus towards that. So the idea is through the platform that we run, we try and get industry to talk about what their problems are, form problem statements, and then get startups to either develop products or kind of adapt existing products for a certain use case, right? So that's how we're trying to address the knowledge gaps, as it were, with direct interaction between the two stakeholders.
A question to all three of you is, you mentioned there are, a manufacturer uses different kinds of chemicals and elements to make a particular technology. And manufacturers, obviously, they are innovating, you are financing. How do we get all of this in a more of a standardized? Are there ways? Is this necessary, or is it also even practical to sort of have some standardization or make recyclers part of the design, so that the quality of materials, the kind of materials that are used, become a discussion point, start from the design, and it's a discussion among all three of you at the start and not at the end or in between.
It's a good question. In the last 2 decades in the country, recycling takes place only because of compliances, right? And the push is only because of compliances. In the last 2 decades, how it's happened is because a multinational company has been following these norms abroad, so they try to follow those best practices here in India too. Indian organizations, to a certain extent, the established ones, they follow, but the not so ones, they do not comply many a times. It's more so, it has been that it's been a revenue generator of scrap selling by the producers. Right? So it's a buy-sell concept. So a recycler, he depends on the quality of material that comes in, and bases that on his expertise, he tries to make a living for himself or herself. Now, what this new rules has done is that they have made it into a market-based model. And what they have done is that because they have given targets for the producers to use secondary raw materials to a certain percentage, the producers are now working with recyclers in a collaborative manner, right? So from a buy-sell, the transformation is happening to a collaboration model there. So the R&D teams and the ops teams are in discussions with each other to understand material, right? Now, the type of material that we get is homogeneous. It's mixed material every time we get. And now with the discussions happening between the two teams out there, The type of material, we call it know your material, KYM. Now we need to be a master of materials being a recycler, else we die very fast, right? And the type of machineries, Exigo, which we have developed is because there's no one size fits all machinery for all types of recycling. Hence you have to design, develop, customize, fabricate machineries yourself. So that's something, so these two, knowing your material and machineries are the two important aspects. This knowledge, along with the producer's knowledge of manufacturing, is helping this industry evolve to the next step, whereby, to use the 5 to 30% of the secondary raw materials in parts or components, core, non-core, the marriage is going to be much, much more better than it was till now. So this, I believe, is the change that's going to come in. And so hopefully in next 2-3 years' time, the compliances is going to drive this market-based model where eventually it will take into consideration of the material and eventually it will get into the design stage. So that's how the engineering, if I may use that word, is happening, and it's being pushed by compliances. Till now, has it been there? Absolutely no, right? Yeah.
I have a slightly different take. Yes, compliances are going to drive, it's a regulated sector. But if you look at renewables across the globe, corporate procurement of renewables is going to perhaps overtake government procurement of renewables from regulated entities, right? Given the ESG goals which a lot of the large global corporates have. And given the fact that renewables is cheaper than fossil in a lot of places between the two tropics anyway. Now what that is doing is, today the corporate is not just happy with displacing fossil. They're going one step behind and saying, okay, how green is my solar or how green is my wind? So you've got, I'll talk about a few things which are out in public domain. So there is the Responsible Buyers Alliance, the RBA. And a lot of the large multinational corporates are part of RBA, where you have a very clear procurement spec for renewable power, which goes all the way back into the upstream supply chain, right? So you look at what's the carbon, the energy payback for the components, what's the water usage, what's the labor, all aspects of sustainability comes into procurement guidelines and qualification of suppliers. Right, traceability of supply chains has of late become very important in at least the solar industry, given forced labor issues which emanated from China. The other tool which a lot of people are using is EPAT. So if you look at eco-label, is a pretty established concept in electrical goods industry. That's catching on into solar per se. Is again corporate procurement. Some of the people are going through the RBA route. Some are using EPAT as a basis for deciding the eligibility of their suppliers. And they're saying, okay, if you are EPAT silver or if you EPAT gold, depending on that, we'll give you the preference for securing our projects. So I think the corporate procurement of renewables is driving OEMs and manufacturers to think about circularity, not just circularity, but also all aspects of sustainability. I'll give you one small example which we are doing. So you'll be surprised to know that in our factory in India, all of the water we are going to use, and we're going to use a lot of water, semiconductor manufacturing needs water, we're going to use treated sewage from the city of Chennai as our water source. So, it's constraints force you to think differently. India is a water-starved country, and so you look at recycled water as perhaps a more reliable source than groundwater, right? So either it's a constraint like that, or it could be opportunities in terms of securing corporate procurement of renewables, which is perhaps a bit more lucrative to manufacturers today as compared to selling to, utilities who are not paying you for 1.5 years. So those are the two things which are driving. Colleague on the...
No, I have a comment for you want to finish first, or all right, okay. I wanted to come to you. You've raised your hand. You wanted to comment on the discussion. Go ahead, and then I'll ask another question.
Okay, I just do a very quick kind of a building on what Mr. Rao and Mr. Ghosh has said. One thing about information sharing before manufacturers and recyclers, just want to share something going on in Europe is passports. So material passports and the product passports. EU is passing a proposal of making digital passports even a kind of a legislative requirement. So there's a lot of innovation around that. Looking at, for example, blockchain-based technology, how can information be shared between manufacturers and recyclers in a safe, confidential, but trustworthy way? So when recyclers receive the panels or the batteries, you will know exactly what is inside. And those can be good for second life usage as well, right? For batteries, for example, EV batteries, when it's no longer good for vehicles, there's still enough capacity for stationary storage. So, but understanding the usage history of that battery will be really important to decide its second life. So passports can also facilitate a reuse or lifetime extension. And quickly on Mr. Ghosh's point about procurement. I think already a few years ago, European Union has kind of developed policy instruments, including solar panels. So that's both eco-design standards of what is considered a ecoli designed PV. That, as Mr. Ghosh said, it's not just about circularity, it's about energy efficiency and many other aspects. And along with that, also green public procurement guidelines for governments who would like to purchase. And for the corporate world, in the US, for example, there's CEBA, that's a Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, which is also looking to adding circularity to their procurement guidance. So I just want to quickly share those. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ka. Do you want to go ahead and comment on that, and then I'll go back?
Yeah, sure. I don't think I have much to add here. I mean, as someone who supports startups and innovation, we look for more such engagement so that ultimately the demand side and the supply side is met well. So what we do generally is try to organize roundtables with industry and understand what their needs are, and then get them to engage with startups as well. The other thing which we try and do, and which we are getting perhaps better at, is programs that help researchers commercialize some of their technologies. So there's a lot of research that's locked up. I'd say locked up, but it's, let's say it's stored in research institutions and other labs, and that's waiting to be commercialized. So that's a commercialization pathway program that I believe could fit well with what the recyclers and the producers are trying to do on the same table.
Right, nice. Ka, I wanted to ask you about, since we were discussing, different roles and how certain roles are overlapping now, and from your point of view, what currently is the role of, each of these players in the circularity value chain, and what may change in the future, and also what are the learnings from your other, sectors that could be brought out to the RE sector here?
Yeah, indeed. We analyzed 4 or 5 different value chains on exactly this question. What are the roles of governments? What are the roles of companies, NGOs, finance sector, and the research organizations? So surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, the conclusions are quite similar for different value chains. So I think that might have some reference value for renewable energy as well. So typically, government provides an enabling environment, because let's be honest, market mechanism alone is often not sufficient yet for the company, right, to embrace circularity and other responsible mechanisms. So in absence of a market mechanism, for example, designed for circularity, manufacturers could say, my customers are not asking for that yet, right? Customers are asking for performance, durability, asking for price, but nobody will say, oh, I want a solar panel that's designed for recycling. So in absence of that, then the government has a critical role to create both positive stimulation and regulations to nudge the market towards this direction. And then companies, there's a lot of role that can be played. I think it's already quite well explained by Mr. Goshen and Mr. Rao, from innovation, from product design, from commitment to sourcing materials, and also looking to new business models, right? Second life, again, we haven't talked too much about it today, but it is an integral part of circular economy. And for NGOs like us, it's very often raising awareness, but also monitoring the actual progress, because companies, governments make commitments, but how are they actually doing there? But also we can facilitate, for example, value chain discussions between manufacturers and recyclers, or between governments and business. Financing sector, what can we do without the financing sector? Because the transition costs money. And so definitely we need funding to bridge critical gaps, whether it's innovation or maybe it's, for example, I think Mr. Ghosh was talking about there are lots of costs, and how can we make the recycling economics work out? And the researchers, again, technological innovation, but also guiding the transition, because very often we might feel like we're doing something good, but we might actually forgot something else, right? So really have a holistic science-based assessment of the transition will be critical. So I think those will probably apply to renewable energy as well. But that being said, I'd love to see the different stakeholder groups around renewable energy really getting together so we can work out what is a collective vision and what is a collective action agenda to embed circularity for renewable energy together.
Thanks, Ka. I have one follow-up. The sector is also ripe for greenwashing, and there are other many sectors who have also gone through this. What would you say in the value chain are the pain points, are the pain stakeholders, I would say?
That's a tricky question, Namrata. I think greenwashing, absolutely, it's there, maybe both intentionally and unintentionally. So I think that's also a role of NGOs to really play that monitoring role, to look at, okay, when companies make commitments, that's a great first step, but can companies also publicly communicate their progress, right? Report their progress. So there, and then EU has recently passed for textiles, for example, really regulations on information sharing with consumers to make sure that it's not misleading to the consumers. So, yeah,
Thanks.
Good point.
Thank you. So one last question to all of my panelists here. The discussion that is happening right now is that energy transition needs to quicken its pace. And being responsible takes time. All this, what we're talking about, takes some time, the putting in the safeguards. So how will this impact the speed of transition? And also, how do we balance both of it? We need to obviously transition very quickly, but how do we balance both these roles of being responsible and transition?
Yeah, there's no alternative, right? We need to move ahead, and technology will be changing very fast, and so these other stakeholders in the entire value chain in the ecosystem has to evolve to that level at speed. Especially in the country here in India, if I were to say, because of the vision of a prime various goals that's been set in, and to make India as a manufacturing hub, the speed at which the industry will grow will be phenomenal. Now comes the question of, how do you create a balance? So from a recycler's perspective, what I look at is that technology is an important element in this entire, the ecosystem. And we recyclers would love to come out with technologies which are eco-friendly, which are environment friendly, and which are low cost and high yield. That's what we would look at in a very big way. And second, the efficiency of the processes that we do in our plants, let it be e-waste or batteries or plastic or PCB or precious metal or rare earth metals or anything for that matter, what is the efficiency and what purity can we actually bring out the metals or materials and give it back to the society? This is the second aspect there. But in the whole scheme of things, carbon emissions plays a very important role there. Environment, how do you take care of the APCMs or the air pollution control equipments that we use, in the various manufacturing processes, various recycling processes? These are the challenges which we believe are there. And on the other side, on the supply side, reverse logistics, again, transport is one of the largest polluter, I would say. We know for a fact that India, in the next, by 2030, we are going to look into something around 12 to 15 million units in operation, electric vehicles. That's going to, no, over 60 million vehicles will be there in operation. We're looking at anywhere from around 150 to 300 gigawatt hour batteries going to be available there. So the EVs would play a very important role in reverse logistics of the waste, in the waste management sector in a very big way, right? And similarly, semiconductor industry, magnets, catalytic converters, the rare earth metals, how do you extract? And these reverse logistics of these waste management, these waste products, and recycling them in eco-friendly manner, giving it back to the society. So technology, environment, reverse logistics, and financing again. Where do you get the finance from and who finances it is the question. I mean, it can be the sovereign funds or it could be the stakeholders themselves, especially the auto industry are the ones who are going to invest in recycling of batteries in particular in a very, very big way going forward. So it's a mix currently. There is a dilemma that's going on which first or which equal or which high, which less. But I think we will evolve as a country. I think we are able to get things right in a lot of areas now. And going forward in a few years' time, I think India will stand in a very, very good position in not only saying it, informing it, demonstrating it on the ground, implementing it, and proving to people that, yes, we can. So I'm very confident of that, yeah.
So the question was, will responsibility put brakes on the speed of transition? I think if you take a step back and look at the last decade, I'm talking about the solar industry, the speed of transition was driven by cost. And the cost was on the back of consolidation of supply chain in China, which was again driven by a very opaque system of subsidies, supply chain, everything was opaque. Nobody has any clue of what the true cost of making a solar panel in China is. What do they do with the waste streams, et cetera, right? And I think with the stranglehold which the Chinese created in this industry, during COVID and post-COVID, the rest of the world woke up to looking at alternates. And that reaction, if you look at India in terms of creating an Atmanirbhar Bharat, looking at the PLI scheme to incentivize, every large market today is looking at de-risking their supply chains from China in the solar industry at least. You look at US with the IRA Act. And as you see these schemes roll out, this would accelerate the transition of solar in particular and renewables generally in some of these other markets with responsibility. Because there is inherent provisions in some of these incentives which will drive people to be more responsible. I'll give you again one very small example. So if you look at the solar PLI scheme, it says that you need to encourage use of renewable energy for manufacturing of the panels. Just a small example. But I think as the supply chain becomes more geographically distributed, starts to localize in countries which have very transparent regulations and jurisdictions, you will see responsibility being weaved into the DNA. So I don't see a compromise between the two.
Yeah, I think they've covered mostly everything. I think I'd just like to add, I think we've seen the business case for a lot of decarbonization technologies really becoming much stronger in the last few years, and the transition has been rather quick in India, and I feel the regulatory framework is going in the right direction. we fix a few things, we fix where ownership lies, end of life, that improves a lot of clarity, for example. And I think the ability of entrepreneurs, especially technology entrepreneurs, to respond very quickly to changing market dynamics in India is very strong. So I'm pretty confident about that. The market will respond, and I don't think we need to slow down the transition for sure. It will. The market will respond.
Just in addition to that, where does this fit in with the other climate tech that, the speed at which energy needs to transition, but how do you see, the transition with other climate-related stuff going along with this?
You mean other domains?
Yeah. The pace at which everything else will also need to transition.
Right. I think what we're seeing, of course, energy drove the initial part of the climate tech story. Mobility, of course, as we know, is hugely attracting a lot of capital now. The other three sectors which we see growing very fast is climate smart agriculture, carbon tech, which includes the carbon markets as well as carbon capture, use and storage. It's actually emerging, carbon capture, but it will be a large one for India going forward. And the last one is circularity, and specifically plastic waste and more increasingly lithium recycling. So I think we are seeing an increase in pace in all of these 5 areas now.
Ko, would you like to give your comments on the energy transition versus circularity, responsibility?
Yeah, I think on the kind of a trade-off, well, climate change is a big challenge, but it's not the only challenge the world is facing, right? So if we make analogy to maybe an elderly, a very critically ill a patient, and he might have cardiovascular disease, but he might also have cancer and have diabetes at the same time. So we cannot say, okay, let's just go ahead and try to cure the cardiovascular disease without caring about what it's going to do to the other illness, right? It's quite common sense, I think. But we also cannot say, okay, because we're afraid of the trade-offs, then we don't treat him at all. So what typically hospitals do is that the doctors from different departments will come together and have a meeting and try to agree on a treatment with manageable trade-offs and the side effects. I think we can, we should apply that logic to any transition, because there's no silver bullet, but we also cannot. Trade-offs are not scary, but pretending they are not there will be scary.
Right. Thanks, Ko. Thanks for joining us online. But I'll also like to open up. We have 5 minutes, I think. Sorry about this. Exactly 5 minutes for questions from.
Hi. As a manufacturer, do you see yourself, you mentioned that the cells, like the production capacity of, let's say, a solar panel is more than 20-25 years, which is more than, let's say, life of a panel physically. So do you see yourself as a manufacturer come into refurbishing, as someone who refurbishes the same panels, if not now, then sometime in the future?
As of now, no. The short answer is because as a manufacturer, we always try to push the technology in terms of making products more efficient, more responsible. So what you've manufactured, let's give you an example, right? What panels were sold into India, let's say in 2010, at the beginning of the National Solar Mission, had about 14% efficiency, conversion efficiency, right? Today, that same panel has 22% or 21%. So why would somebody, and the cost is maybe 1/5. Because it's become more efficient, the cost has come down. So refurbishing of solar modules hasn't really caught on because A, the technology evolves very fast. B, the cost to acquire the new technology and the benefits it gives over a lifetime is a lot more than investing into refurbishing the modules. So it's a cottage industry per se, as you look at some of the off-grid and the solar product segment. And that's not a very good idea because there is no standards guiding the refurbishments of solar modules. So you get a lot of crappy stuff going into people's homes, and there could be safety issues there. But as an OEM, we would focus all our energies on making the panel cheaper, maybe free, at the rate at which the costs were going down. But pushing the boundaries on materials, efficiency, reliability, that's been the focus of all manufacturers.
Thank you.
It's an exciting discussion in the last an hour or so from the expert panels. I don't have any question, but I have an observation. Of course, this forum being renewable energy, not only solar. Of course, the panel of experts sitting here, they belong to solar sector. They have dealt with very nicely. What I would like to also propose is, you may have a separate session, if not today, some other day, on the wind sector, especially wind blades. Recycling of wind blades is a big issue, and the materials which are involved there, they get solidify very fast, and then how to recycle that blades is still not, a good path is not made at the moment as of now. And in fact, the policy for repowering of wind power is there, of course, which is not taking off, but then once that takes off, around 10,000 megawatt of wind power plants which are already existing, which were established from 95 onwards, will be on ground. So those blades and those materials, how to recycle them, maybe you can plan a session separately. Thanks.
Definitely. It's part of the
Yeah,
initiative,
right.
but yeah, today's discussion
Yeah,
did miss
I understand that.
Noted, definitely. Yes.
Hi, I'm Saloni Sachdeva. Thank you so much for the very interesting discussion. My question was around how do we set the recycling targets for India? If we take learnings from the European Union's WE directive, they have set it by percentage weight. I think it's 80 to 85%. But the challenge there is that if you look at a solar panel, it's a one product, one equipment, but it has glass, aluminium, and other framework which just captures the 80% weight. And then we are done with the regulation and the policy. There's a tick mark, and hence the incentive to the other recyclers reduces. And also, sir, as you mentioned, that certain percentage could be reused and the secondary material could be reused while manufacturing. But then again, if we just say 20 to 25%, that is the glass aluminium. So we are not focusing on high value recycling and just limiting to the mechanical part. So how do we handle this kind of challenge in India? And I also had another question on, there's a global debate that recycling is not economical. And the challenge is that we don't know how to make money from the byproducts of recycling. I understand we can reuse it and reuse the recycled products also, but then do we need to create a secondary market for these recycled byproducts? Thank you.
Very good questions. Okay. Currently, in Central Pollution Control Board, there's heated debates happening between various stakeholders. What should be the end of life for multiple product categories that's been announced? Okay. How do you decide? That's a big question. It's not there. Even in 2016, when the EPR rules got announced for e-waste, the same questions came in for 21 item codes. Every producer says, my product lives for life. It never dies, right? That's what the producer says. And we've seen examples of products where, example, mobile phones. There are mobile phones costing a lakh of rupees. There are smartphones costing even 6,000 rupees. Why? Both are smartphones, right? Why is there a difference? There's a quality difference out there. So similarly, in the government of India, whenever the government looks into understanding the end of life, the concept itself, the stakeholder discussions takes place. A lot of data is actually looked at. And the type of material, the same brand, similar model that is produced or manufactured or imported in India versus the same abroad, there is a difference in quality. Right? So that's a known fact per se. So basis various parameters, the end of life is actually identified and worked out by CPCB, and it's announced there. Now, second comes the question of your SRMs that's being used. This is the very first time that the government of India has taken this initiative of making the producer and recycler work together, right? and by making it mandatory that the SRMs of X percentage. The recycling target that's been given to the recyclers also is from around 55% to 70% targets only has been given, recovery targets to start with. Since it's new, we are at a nascent stage, it will take 3-5 years for the industry to evolve to that level and then offer those materials there. So, but however, the catch, the answer to your question is a catch that the government of India has put in for recyclers, that if I am recycling 100 tons of material of any product per se, and there is a conversion ratio that's been announced. So the certificate that I will upload for a producer to buy from the online portal depends upon my efficiency that I prove to the government of India. So if I say I'm only 70% efficient, I will consume my 100 tons, but I will declare only 70 tons of EPR certificate. So it's a loss for the recycler. So obviously the recycler has to increase his efficiencies in technology and output per se, right? And third, who said recycling business is not profitable? I am sorry, miss, that is not true. You know, there is a viability gap because we have a large informal sector. I'll put it this way. Globally, e-waste, 53 million tons is the disposal that's taking place. India, it's around 3.5 million. We will become numero uno in the next few years' time at the speed at which all you youth are using gadgets now. So, you know, we will be there at 10 million there. Batteries, I told you, is going to be around 150 to 300 gigawatt of batteries that's going to be available there. Solar panels, 80 gigawatt hour, it's going to go to 500. It's going to be huge solar panels out there. Plastics, it runs into millions. God knows what it is, right? So everywhere there's an opportunity. If you as a recycler are able to bring in that processes, that cost-effective processes, and if you're a master of your machinery, you will make money. Yes, currently for certain product, not all the items can be recycled. Always there is something called non-recyclable, right? Now, what happens to that? How do you work the cost? Logistics cost in India is pretty high. So the government of India is coming out with an entrepreneurship program for micro entrepreneurs, and it's called Tide, where we're looking at hundreds of entrepreneurs coming up with micro factories across the country. And DST, I think, will be getting into the funding, and there'll be a lot of other funding agencies too. That's a program because we compete with the informal sector in a very big way. Now, informal sector, we have two aspects. One is the recycler, one is the collector. We do not want the recycler to flourish, but the collectors needs to be there. So that's another area. So you might become a specialist of a certain product category, or you might become a processor of multiple product categories under one roof itself. There is money to be made. You need to pick and choose your battles, but you need to be a master of your material. You need to be a master of your machinery. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for ending that. I'll end the questions now. I'm getting excited. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Sujay.
Thank you. So I have the pleasure of closing the discussion today. It's been incredibly insightful. It's been very, very informative, and I've learned quite a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you have learned quite a lot as well. I'll do a quick recap of what we learned today, actually. I'll take 5 minutes, so bear with me. In the morning, Annapurna started us off with a call to action to build India with green and clean energy that centers people, economy, and biodiversity together for them to be able to thrive. This is not a small task. As Bharat rightly said, this can't be tackled by one organization or one nation alone. And we know that there's no playbook to this transition to get it right. It won't be easy, but we also know that this is not the reason to not do it. In fact, the issues that we heard about here, and only a few of them, will only grow with prominence. And getting ahead of them will be the key for all the actors in the value chain. Bharat also shared our joint initiative called the Responsible Energy Initiative, and a request to join us and be a part of just doing that, driving collective action and working together towards solving those issues. Our first panel explored the role of finance in enabling and building a responsible energy system. We heard that we're not just facing this challenge here, but it is global. And there are efforts underway globally to try and address these as well. Puneet at NIIF set out that tackling these challenges in the supply chain in particular won't be something that will be easy and no one organization or investor can do alone. There were knowing looks from the audience when Puneet mentioned that, acknowledging how hard it is and how important it is to work together closely rather than transactionally with each other. He rightly shared that this is, at its crux, a matter of attitude and mindset change, moving ESG from a tick box approach or something that you do towards the end for compliance, towards a more proactive approach that you build in right from the beginning. Finding a balance between short-termism of getting things done and having a longer-term vision of creating value for everyone. There was very interesting consensus in the panel that we are somewhere between 20 to 30% ESG compliance of where we really need to be, and we're not where we need to be as a sector. Subramaniam, our friend from NSCFI, offered us a trace of hope in the supply chain, and that local manufacturing, as it ramps up in India, has the opportunity to ensure that we start building our local supply chains in a responsible manner. Bhargavi then put down the ask that we need everyone to be on the table and for finance to make sure that it happens, and that's where the power lies. In the next panel, we heard from Mr. Ram, who spoke about the challenges for the industry that the industry is facing, the ambition that India has set for each other, and how important SDGs are to India's development, and particularly RE development as well. We also heard from him on how there's a movement for the RE sector to learn from the issues that are coming up and use that as an opportunity to reflect our decision-making, reflect our processes, and be more conscious of centering SDGs and well-being as we're developing the sector. Sushil then in the second panel reminded us that we're a mega biodiverse country. We heard more about the SiteRight tool, a resource that is available to you right now for free to help address the need for low-impact siting for land procurement, for renewable energy, and for other industries which need massive amounts of land for their development. The panel also shared ideas such as what do we do with abandoned mines? What do we do with mindsets and emotions that are related to the mines and that are going to be abandoned? And how do we bridge the two transitions that are happening, the transition away from fossil fuels and the transition towards clean energy? We heard a caution from the panel to not accept that wasteland is truly waste, and therefore it is only fit for renewable plants, and to be more conscious about what we think is wasteland. More hope came from the third panel on circularity that we heard just now. Regulation is getting a lot more proactive in this manner. It is catching up. And that even without regulation, there are private companies and startups that are looking at recycling as not just as a responsible action, but also as a business opportunity that we heard from Sujoy. There are still a lot of gaps that exist. Founders are seeing a business case for building circularity within the sector, but also doing it right from the get-go instead of reacting later on, 10, 15 years down the line, on thinking about how recycling might work. We also heard from Sujai towards the closing that responsibility will be weaved into our DNA, and that's quite rightly said as well. Towards the end, all I have to say is it does feel like a long haul, but we don't have the luxury of time, and therefore we must learn with each other and from others and innovate quickly and act quickly as well. The sector, while we've got great hopes from the sector for tackling climate change and putting us on a rapid path towards decarbonization, we're also facing impacts of climate change like we had never before. So the impacts that we're seeing are also exacerbated because of what we've got and the external circumstances. With this, we're going into the phase of action as part of the Responsible Energy Initiative and also as part of the Nature Conservancy and Vasudha team that I represent here as well. So therefore, we invite you to join us to be amongst the pioneers that are getting ahead of the game, putting value, your value and everyone else's value first, and therefore then looking at how do we grow the RE sector as well. On behalf of the team at Nature Conservancy and Vasudha Foundation too, I invite you to explore how you might use the SiteRed tool in your work, whether you're a student or a member from the industry. On behalf of the Responsible Energy Initiative, I invite you to come speak to us about the actions that we're driving that you saw here as well. Towards the end, all I'd like to say is I saw from the registration list and also from the faces that there's a lot of students in here too. To be honest, we're all students here. We learned a lot today and we never stop learning and therefore we never stop being students. But as you begin your professional journey, I believe the things that you learned today, you will hold them and take them into whichever industry you're going to join, whether climate action, renewable energy, or traditional industry, and keep those responsible energy principles and visions with you as you go on your professional journey. And we will try to do the same as well. Towards the end, I'd like to thank all the partners that have put in a lot of work in making this summit a success. The Responsible Energy Initiative partners, WRI, Terry, our team at Forum, Climate Group, CEW, Business and Human Rights Resource Center, Landesa, Consensus Building Institute, WWF India, Summit partners, Nature Conservancy, Vasudha Foundation, National Solar Energy Federation of India, Climate Trends, and finally the venue team, Rajendra, Ajit, Pamita and team for feeding us well, for keeping everything going smoothly when it comes to tech, and for creating a healthy learning environment for all of us. So thank you everyone. This was the first summit, but clearly not the last, and we've heard your call that this needs a lot more action and a lot more attention. Thank you very much.